Section 1 of Amurath to Amurath. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Amurath to Amurath by Gertrude Bell. Preface and Note. قال لبيد بن ربيع بالينا وما تبلى النجوم الطوالي وتبقى الجبال بعدنا والمساني. We wither away, but they wane not, the stars that above us rise. The mountains remain after us, and the strong towers when we are gone. Labid ibn Rabi'a. End of section 1.
Section 2 of Amurath to Amurath. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Amurath to Amurath by Gertrude Bell. Aleppo to Ahmar, February 3rd through February 21st. Part 1. A small crowd had gathered round one of the booths in the saddlery bazaar, and sounds of controversy echoed down the vaulted ways. I love to follow the tortuous arts of Oriental commerce, and, moreover, at the end of the dark gallery, the February sun was shining upon the steep mound of the citadel. Therefore I turned into the Saddler's Street, for I had no other business that afternoon than to find the road back into Asia, back into the familiar enchantment of the East. The group of men round the booth swayed and parted, and out of it shouldered the tall figure of Fatah. "May God be exalted," said he, stopping short as he caught sight of me. "It is well that your Excellency should witness the dealings of the saddlers of Aleppo. Without shame are they. 30 years and more I have lived in Aleppo, and until this day no man has asked me to give 2 piastres for a hank of string." He cast a withering glance, charged with concentrated animosity, upon the long-robed figure that stood, string in hand, upon the counter. "Allah," said I warily, for I did not wish to parade my ignorance of the market value of string. 2 piastres? "It is good string," said the saddler ingratiatingly, holding out what looked like a tangled bundle of black wool. "Ahwa," intervened a friend. "Abdullah sells naught but the best string." I took a seat upon a corner of the counter, and Fatah came slowly back, shaking his head mournfully, as one who recognizes but cannot amend the shortcomings of mankind. The whole company closed in behind him, anxious to witness the upshot of the important transaction upon which we were engaged. On the outskirts stood one of my muleteers, like a man plunged in grief. Even the donkey beside him, a recent purchase, though acquired at what cost of eloquence only Fatah can know, drooped its ears. It was plain that we were to be mulcted of a farthing over that hank of string. Fatah drew a cotton bag out of his capacious trousers. "Take the mother of 8, said he, extracting a small coin. "He gives you the mother of 8, whispered one of the company encouragingly to the saddler. "By God and the Prophet, it cost me more. Wallah, it did. Oh, my uncle!" expostulated the saddler, enforcing his argument with imaginary bonds of kinship. Fatah threw up his eyes to the vault, as though he would search heaven for a sign to confound this impious statement. With averted head, he gazed hopelessly down the long alley, but the vault was dumb, and in all the bazaar there was no promise of divine vengeance. A man touched his elbow. "Oh, father," said he, "give him the mother of 10. The lines of resolution deepened in Fatah's face. "Sir, we would finish," he cried, and fumbled once more in the cotton bag. The suspense was over. Satisfaction beamed from the countenances of the bystanders. "Take it, O father, take it," said they, nudging the saddler into recognition of his unexampled opportunity. The hank of string was handed over to Hajj Amur, who packed it gloomily into the donkey's saddlebags, already crammed to overflowing with the miscellaneous objects essential to any well-ordered caravan on a long journey. Fatah and Hajj Omar had been shopping since dawn, and it was now close upon sunset. I climbed down from the counter. "With your leave," said I, saluting the saddler. "Go in peace," he returned amicably. "And if you want more string, Fatah knows where to get it. He always deals with me." The crowd melted back into its avocations, if it had any, and the excitement caused by our commercial dealings died away. "Oh, Fatah," said I as we strolled down the bazaar with the donkey, "there is great labor in buying all we need." Fatah mopped his brow with a red handkerchief. "And the outlay," he sighed. "But we got that string cheap." And with that, he settled his tar brush more jauntily, kicked the donkey, and "Yalla, father," said he. If there be a better gate to Asia than Aleppo, I do not know it. A virile population, a splendid architecture, the quickening sense of a fine Arab tradition, have combined to give the town an individuality sharply cut, and more than any other Syrian city, she seems instinct with an inherent vitality. The princes who drew the line of massive masonry about her flanks and led her armies against the emperors of the West, the merchants who gathered the wealth of Inner Asia into her bazaars and bartered it against the riches of the Levant Company, have handed down the spirit of enterprise to the latest of her sons. They drive her caravans south to Baghdad, and east to Van, and north to Konya. And even in the remotest cities of the Turkish Empire, I have seldom failed to find a native of Aleppo eager to provide me with a local delicacy and to gossip over local politics. "Here is one who heard we were from Aleppo," says Fatah, with an affected indifference. "His brother lives in the street next to mine, and he has brought your Excellency some apples, but they are not like the apples of Aleppo." Then we exchange a greeting warm with fellow citizenship, and the apples are flavored with goodwill, even if they cannot be expected to vie with the fruit of our own countryside. It was at Aleppo that I made acquaintance with the Turkey which had come into being on July 24th, 1908. Even among those whose sympathies were deeply engaged on behalf of the new order, there were not many Europeans who, in January 1909, had any clue to public opinion outside Constantinople and Salonika. The events of the 6 stirring months that had just elapsed had yet to be heard and apprehended, and no sooner had I landed in Beirut than I began to shed European formulas and to look for the Asiatic value of the great catchwords of revolution. In Aleppo, sitting at the feet of many masters, who ranged down all the social grades, from the high official to the humblest laborer for hire, I learnt something about the hopes and fears, the satisfaction, the bewilderment, and the indifference of Asia. The populace had shared in the outburst of enthusiasm which had greeted the granting of the Constitution, a moment of unbridled expectation when, in the brief transport of universal benevolence, it seemed as if the age-long problems of the Turkish Empire had been solved with the stroke of the pen. They had journeyed back from that utopia to find that human nature remained much as it had been before. The public mind was unhinged. Men were obsessed with a sense of change, perplexed because change was slow to come, and alarmed lest it should spring upon them unawares. The relaxation of the rule of fear had worked in certain directions with immediate effect, but not invariably to the increase of security. True, there was a definite gain of personal liberty. The spies had disappeared from the official quarters, and with them the exiles who had been condemned by Abdullah Ahmed, on known or unknown pretexts, to languish helplessly in the provincial capitals. Everywhere, A daily press had sprung into existence, and foreign books and papers passed unhindered through the post. The childish and exasperating restrictions with which the Sultan had fettered his Christian subjects had fallen away. The Armenians were no longer tied to the spot whereupon they dwelt. They could, and did, travel where they pleased. The namusier, the identification certificate, had received the annual government stamp without delay and without need of bribes. In every company, Christian and Moslem, tongues were unloosed in outspoken criticism of official dealings. But it was extremely rare to find in these freely vented opinions anything of a constructive nature. The government was still, to the bulk of the population, a higher power, disconnected from those upon whom it exercised its will. You might complain of its lack of understanding, just as you cursed the hailstorm that destroyed your crops, but you were in no way answerable for it, nor would you attempt to control or advise it, any more than you would offer advice to the hail cloud. Many a time I have searched for some trace of the Anglo-Saxon acceptance of a common responsibility in the problems that beset the state, a sense the germs of which exist in the Turkish village community and in the tribal system of the Arab and the Kurd. It never went beyond an embryonic application to small local matters, and the answers I received resembled, mutatis mutandis, that of Fatah when I questioned him as to the part he had played in the recent general election. Your Excellency knows that I am a carriage driver. What do I have to do with government? But I can tell you that the new government is no better than the old. Look now at Aleppo. Have we a juster law? Voila, no. In some respects they had indeed a yet more laggard justice than in the days of tyranny. So we spoke of the years that were past. Or perhaps it would be truer to say, a yet more laggard administration. The dislocation of the old order was a fact considerably more salient than the substitution for it of another system. The officials shared to the full the general sense of impermanence that is inevitable to revolution, however soberly it may be conducted. They were uncertain of the limits of their own authority, and as far as possible, each one would shuffle out of definite action, lest it might prove that he had overstepped the mark. In the old days, a person of influence would occasionally rectify by processes superlegal a miscarriage of the law. The miscarriages continued, but intervention was curtailed by doubts and misgivings. The spies had been, in part, replaced by the agents of the committee, who wielded a varying but practically irresponsible power. How far the supremacy of the local committees extended, it was difficult to judge. Nor would a conclusion based upon evidence from one province have been applicable to another, but my impression is that nowhere were they of much account, and that the further the district was removed from the coast, that is, from contact with the European centers of the new movement, the less influential did they become. Possibly in the remoter provinces, the local committee was itself reactionary, as I have heard it affirmed, or at best an object of ridicule. But in Syria, at any rate, the committees existed in more than name. Their inner organization was at that time secret, as was the organization of the parent society. They had taken form at the moment when the Constitution was proclaimed, and had undergone a subsequent reconstruction at the hands of delegates from Salonika, who were sent to instruct them in their duties. I came across one case where these delegates, having been unwisely selected, left the committee less well qualified to cope with the local conditions than they found it. The committees opened clubs of union and progress, the members of which numbered, in the bigger towns, several hundreds. The Club of Aleppo was a flourishing institution lodged in a large bare room in the center of town. It offered no luxuries to the members, military and civilian, who gathered round its tables of an evening, but it supplied them with a good stock of newspapers, which they read gravely under the shadow of a life-size portrait of Midhat Pasha, the hero and the victim of the first Constitution. The night of my visit, the newly formed Subcommittee for Commerce was holding its first deliberations on a subject which is of the utmost importance to the prosperity of Aleppo, the railway connection with the port of Alexandretta. To this discussion I was admitted, but the proceedings after I had taken my seat at the board were of an emotional rather than of a practical character, and I left with the cries of "Yasha Inglaterra!" "Long live England!" in my ears. I carried away with me the impression that whatever might be the future scope of its activities, the committee could not fail in these early days to be of some educational value. It brought men together to debate on matters that touched the common good and invited them to bear a part in their promotion. The controlling authority of the executive body was of much more questionable advantage. Its members, whose names were kept profoundly secret, were supposed to keep watch over the conduct of affairs and to forward reports to the Central Committee. I say supposed, because I have no means of knowing whether they actually carried out what they stated to be their duties. They justified their position by declaring that it was a temporary expedient which would lapse as soon as the leaders of the new movement were assured of official loyalty to the Constitution, and, arbitrary as their functions may appear, it would have been impossible to assert that Asiatic Turkey was fit to run without leading strings. But I do not believe that the enterprise of the committees was sufficient to hamper a strong governor, and so far as my observation went, the welfare of each province depended, and must depend for many a year to come, upon the rectitude and determination of the man who is placed in authority over it. Underlying all Turkish politics are the closely interwoven problems of race and religion, which had been stirred to fresh activity by exuberant promises. Fraternity and equality are dangerous words to scatter broadcast over an empire composed of many nationalities and controlled by a dominant race. Under conditions such as these, equality in its most rigid sense can scarcely be said to exist, while fraternity is complicated by the fact that the ruling race professes Islam, whereas many of the subordinate elements are Christian. The Christian population of Aleppo was bitterly disheartened at having failed to return one of their own creed out of the 6 deputies who represent the Vilayet. I met in the house of a common friend a distinguished member of the Christian community who threw a great deal of light on this subject. He began by observing that even in the Vilayet of Beirut, though so large a proportion of the inhabitants are Christian, the appointment of a non-Muslim governor would be impossible. So much, he said, for the boast of equality. This is, of course, undeniable, though in the central government, where they are not brought into direct contact with the Moslem population, Christians are admitted to the highest office. He complained that when the Christians of Aleppo had urged that they should be permitted to return a representative to the chamber, the Moslems had given them no assistance. They replied, interposed our host, that it was all one, since Christians and Moslems are merged in Ottoman. I turned to my original interlocutor and inquired whether the various communions had agreed upon a common candidate. No, he answered with some heat. They brought forward as many candidates as there are sects. Thus it is in our unhappy country. Even the Christians are not brothers, and one church will not trust the other. I said that this regrettable want of confidence was not confined to Turkey, and asked whether, if they could have commanded a united vote, they would have carried their candidate. He admitted with reluctance that he thought it would have been possible, and this view was confirmed by an independent witness who said that a Christian candidate, carefully chosen and well supported, would have received in addition the Jewish vote, since that community was too small to return a separate representative. As for administrative reform, it hangs upon the urgent problem of finance. From men who are overworked and underpaid, neither efficiency nor honesty can be expected. But to increase their number or their salary is an expensive business, and money is not to be had. How small are the local resources may be judged from the fact that Aleppo, a town of at least 120,000 inhabitants, possesses a municipal income of from 3,000 to 4,000 pounds a year. Judges who enjoy an annual salary of from 60 to 90 pounds are not likely to prove incorruptible, and it's difficult to see how a mounted policeman can support existence on less than 12 pounds a year, though one of my Zepteyas assured me that the pay was sufficient, if it had been regular. In the Vilayet of Aleppo and the Mutsariflik of Dayar, all the Zapteyas who accompanied me had received the arrears due to them, as well as their weekly wage. But this fortunate condition did not extend to other parts of the empire. The plain man of Aleppo did not trouble his head with fiscal problems. He judged the new government by immediate results and found it wanting. I rode one sunny afternoon with the boy, Fatah's brother-in-law, who was to accompany us on our journey, to the spring of Aintel, a mile or two north of the town. Yusuf, his name, as Fatah was careful to point out, is French. "I thought your Excellency knew French," he said severely, in answer to my tactless inquiry. Yusuf conducted me across wet meadows, where in spring the citizens of Aleppo take the air, and past a small mound, no doubt artificial, a relic, perhaps, of the constructions of Seyf Addullah, whose palace once occupied these fields. Close to the spring stands a mill with a pair of stone lions carved on the slab above the door, the heraldic supporters of some prince of Aleppo. They had been dug out of the mound, together with a fine basalt door, like those which are found among 4th and 5th century ruins in the neighboring hills. The miller dusted it with his sleeve and observed that it was an antica. A party of dyers, who were engaged in spreading their striped cotton cloths upon the swarth, did me the honors of their drying ground. Merry fellows they were, the typical sturdy Christians of Aleppo, who hold their own with their Muslim brothers and reckon little of distinctions of creed. "Christians and Moslems," said one, "see how we labor. If the Constitution were worth anything, the poor would not work for such small rewards." "At any rate," said I, "you got your namusia cheaper this year." "Ah, true," he replied, "but who can tell how long it will last?" "Please God, it will endure," said I. "Please God," he answered, "but we should have been better satisfied to see the soldiers govern. A strong hand we need here in Aleppo, that the poor may enjoy the fruits of their toil." "Hey, wah," said another, "and a government that we know." Between them they had summed up popular opinion, which is ever blind to the difficulties of reform, and impatient because progress is necessarily slow-footed. We passed, on our return from the Tekiah of Abu Bekr, a beautiful Mamluk shrine with cypresses in its courtyard, which lift their black spires proudly over that treeless land. The brother of the hereditary sheikh showed me the mosque. It contains an exquisite mihrab of laced stonework, and windows that are protected by carved wooden shutters and filled with old colored glass. Near the mosque is the square hall of a bath, now fallen into disrepair. 4 bendentives convert the square into an octagon, and 8 more hold the circle of the dome. As fine a piece of massive construction as you would wish to see. The sheikh and his family occupied some small adjoining rooms, and the young wife of my guide made me welcome with smiles and lemon sherbet. From the deep embrasure of her window I looked out upon Aleppo citadel, and congratulated her upon her secluded house set in the thickness of ancient walls. "Yes," she replied, eagerly detailing the benefits of Providence, "and we have a carpet for winter time, and there is no mother-in-law." Aleppo is the Greek Berea, but the town must have played a part in the earlier civilizations of North Syria. It lies midway between two Hittite capitals, Carchemish on the Euphrates and Kadesh on the Orontes, in the heart of a fertile country strewn with mounds and with modern mud-built villages. The chief town of this district was Chalcis, the modern Keneshrin, a day's journey to the south of Aleppo. But with the development of the great Seleucid trade route between Seleucia on the Tigris and Antioch on the Orontes, which Strabo describes as passing through Hierapolis, Aleppo, being on the direct line to Antioch, must have gained in importance, and it was perhaps for this reason that the little Syrian village saw the Seleucid foundations of Araa. The Arabic name, Haleb, retains a reminiscence of the original local appellation, which never slipped out of memory and finally conquered the Greek Berea. Mohammedan tradition recognizes the fact that Haleb was the ancient name of the city in the foolish tale which connects it with the cows of Abraham, the root of the word Haleb being the verb signifying to milk, and the Emperor Julian knew that Berea was the same as Caleb. Aleppo is not without evidences of a remote antiquity. Every archaeologist in turn has tried his hand at the half-obliterated Hittite inscription, which is built, upside down, into the walls of the mosque of Kikhan, near the Antioch gate. Among the ruins of the citadel are two roughly worked Hittite lions. Mr. Hogarth was the first to identify them, and I found in the French consulate a headless eagle carved in basalt, which belongs to the same period. The steep escarpment of the castle mound is akin to the ancient fortified sites of northern Mesopotamia. Julian mentions the Acropolis of Verea. It was protected in a later age by a revetment of stone slabs, most of which were stripped away by Timur Lenk when he overwhelmed the town in 1401 and laid it in ruins. I know of only one building in Aleppo, the origin of which can be attributed with certainty to the pre-Mohammedan period, the Jamil Helawaya, near the Great Mosque. It has been completely rebuilt. The present dome, resting on pendentives, with a tambour broken by 6 windows, belongs to one of the later reconstructions, but the beautiful acanthus capitals must be ascribed to the 5th century on account of their likeness to the capitals in the Church of St. Simeon Stylites, a day's journey northwest of Aleppo. The great school of architecture which they represent affected the builders of Islam through many a subsequent age, and you will find the Mamluks still flinging the leaves of the wind-borne acanthus about the capitals of their mosques. In the 10th century, Aleppo was the chief city of the Hamdanid prince Saif el-Dalu, a noble patron of the arts. It was he who built the south gate in the walls, the Bab Kenessaran, and rebuilt the Antioch gate after its destruction by Nicephorus Phocas. He repaired the citadel, set the shrine of Hussein upon the hillside west of the town, and erected his own splendid dwelling outside the walls to the north. His palace was ravaged before his death. His gates and mosques have been rebuilt, and there remains for the period before Saladin little or nothing but the mosque inside the citadel, built in 1160 by Nur el-Din, the greatest of the Syrian Atabegs, and the Jami es-Shebishe, near the Antioch gate, which, in spite of its ruined condition, is one of the loveliest monuments of the art of Islam in the whole town of Aleppo. Along the top of the wall, and carried uninterruptedly around the square minaret, runs a Sufic inscription, cut in a Cavetto molding. Below it is a band of interlacing rinceaux, unsurpassed in boldness and freedom of design, and above it a heavy cimatium, borne on modillions and adorned with rinceaux. The classical outline of the cornice, together with the exquisite oriental decoration, give it a singular hybrid beauty. This mosque apart, the finest buildings are due to the Ayyubids, and chiefly to Al-Malik es-Zahir, the son of Saladin, who ruled in Aleppo at the end of the 12th century. Beyond the walls, to the south of the city, in the quarter of Firdaus, the descendants of Saladin held their court, and though their palaces have disappeared, how much more we should know of Mohammedan architecture if each successive conqueror had not ruined the house of his predecessor. The suburb is still resplendent with mosques and tombs. Here stands the madrasa of El-Malik ez-Zahir, with an arcade borne on capitals that retain a reminiscence of classical form, though they are hung with a garland of leaves that are closer to the Sasanian than to the Greek. Near it is the Mosque of Firdaus, built by the king's widow when she was regent for her son. Over the mihrab of this mosque is a bold entrelac decoration, which is to be found also in the shrine of Hussein, a building that owes its present form to El-Malik el-Zahir. The Mosque of Es-Salahin shelters a gigantic footprint of Abraham, and about it lie the tombs of the pious who sought a resting place near the site sanctified by the patriarch, tombstones worthy of a museum, carved with Sufic inscriptions and with vine scrolls and bunches of grapes. And falling now into unheeded decay are other memorials of the dead, their walls covered with delicate tracery and their windows filled with an exquisite lacework of stone. They were great builders, these princes of Islam, Ayyubid and Mamluk, and in nothing greater than in their mastery of structural difficulties. The problem of the dome, its thrust and its setting over a square substructure, received from them every possible solution. They bent the solid stone into airy forms of infinite variety. Their splendid masonry satisfied the eye, as does the wall of a Greek temple, and none knew better than they the value of discreet decoration. The restraint and beauty of such treatment of the wall surface as is to be found in the Khan of Wazir or the Khan of Sabun bear witness to a master hand. The grace and ordered symmetry of these facades are as devoid of monotony as are the palace walls of the early Venetian Renaissance, to which they are closely related, and here, as in Venice, the crowning beauty of color is added to that of form and proportion. But it is color of the sun's own making. The sharp black outline of a window opening, the half tones of a carved panel lying upon the smooth brightness of the masonry, soberly enhanced by the occasional use of a darker stone, either in courses or in alternate vissoirs. If you are so fortunate as to have many friends in Aleppo, you will find that the domestic architecture is no less admirable, and drinking your coffee under paneled ceilings rich with dull golds and soft deep reds, you will magnify once again the genius of the artificers of Asia. The walls and gates of the city, though they are not so well preserved as those of Diyarbakir, are fine examples of medieval fortification. To the north, a prosperous quarter lies beyond the older circuit, and the heraldic lions of the Mamluks look down upon streets crowded with traffic. Armorial bearings played a large part in the decorative scheme of the Mohammedan builders. The type characteristic of Aleppo is a disc projecting slightly from the wall, carved with a cup, from the base of which spring a pair of leaves. Upon the cup there are strange signs which are said to have been imitated from Egyptian hieroglyphs, a motive introduced by the Mamluks, but I have noticed a variety of coats of the same period, such as the whorl which fills the disc upon the Bab el Makam, and the pair of upright pothooks, set back to back, upon the Jamil Mak Amat, in the Firdaus quarter. These discs, together with bands of inscription, are the sole ornaments placed upon the city gates. The somber splendor of the architecture of Aleppo is displayed nowhere better than in the Bimaristan of El-Malik el-Zahir, which was built as a place of confinement for criminal lunatics, and is still used for that purpose. The central court terminates at the southern end in the lewan of a mosque covered with an oval dome. Before it lies the ceremonial water tank, if anyone should have the heart to wash or pray in that house of despair. A door from the court leads to a stone corridor, out of which open rectangular stone chambers, with massive walls rising to a great height, and carrying round and oval domes. Through narrow window slits, feeble shafts of light fall into the dank well beneath, and shiver through the iron bars that close the cells of the lunatics. They sit more like beasts than men, loaded with chains in their dark cages, and glower at each other through the bars. And one was sick, and moaned upon his wisp of straw. And one rattled his chains, and clawed at the bars as though he would cry for mercy, but had forgotten human speech. "They do not often recover," said the jailer, gazing indifferently into the sick man's cell. And I wondered in my heart whether there were any terms in which to reckon up the misery that had accumulated for generations under El-Malik Es-Sahir's domes. Like the numismatic emblem of a city goddess, Aleppo wears a towered crown. The citadel lies immediately to the east of the bazaars. A masonry bridge, resting on tall, narrow arches, spans the moat between a crenellated outpost and the great square block of the inner gatehouse. Through a worked iron door, dated in the reign of El-Malik Es-Sahir, you pass into a vaulted corridor, which turns at right angles under an arch decorated with interlaced dragons, and ends at another arched doorway, on which stand the leopards of Sultan Baybars, who rebuilt the castle in the 13th century. Above the entrance is a columned hall, grass-grown and ruined. Passages lead down from it into vaulted chambers, which would seem to have been repaired after Timur sacked Aleppo. Some of the blocks used in the walls here are Jewish tombstones dated by Hebrew inscriptions in the 13th century, and since it is scarcely possible that Baybars should have desecrated a cemetery of his own day, they must indicate a later period of reconstruction. The garrison was supplied with water from a well 80 meters deep, which lies near the northern edge of the castle mound. Besides the well hole, a stair goes down to the water level, near which point vaulted passages branch out to right and left. Tradition says that the whole mound is raised upon a substructure of masonry, but tradition is always ready with such tales, and the only inscription in the passages near the well is Sufik. At the northern limit of the enclosure stands a high tower. If you would know Aleppo, you must climb. From the Muhaddin's gallery, the town lies revealed, a wide expanse of flat roof covering the bazaars, broken by dome and minaret, by the narrow clefts of streets and the courts of mosque and khan. The cypresses of Abu Bakr stand sentinel to the north. From that direction, Timur entered through the Bab el Hadid. In the low ground beneath the Antioch gate, the armies of the Crusaders lay encamped. The railway, an invader more powerful than Baldwin, holds it now. Turn to the east, and as far as the eye can see stretch rolling uplands, the granary of North Syria, and across them wind the caravan tracks that lead into Inner Asia. There, through the waste, flows the Euphrates. You might, almost, from the tower, catch the glint of its waters, so near to the western sea does its channel approach here. I have never come to know an Oriental city without finding that it possesses a distinctive personality much more strongly accentuated than is usually the case in Europe. And this is essentially true of the Syrian towns. To compare Damascus, for example, with Aleppo would be to set side by side two different conceptions of civilization. Damascus is the capital of the desert, Aleppo of the fertile plain. Damascus is the city of the Arab tribes who conquered her and set their stamp upon her. Aleppo, standing astride the trade routes of northern Mesopotamia, is a city of merchants, quick to defend the wealth that they have gathered afar. So I read the history that is written upon her walls, and impressed deep into the character of her adventurous sons. At Aleppo, the current of the imagination is tributary to the Euphrates. with Xenophon, with Julian, with all the armies captained by a dream of empire that dashed and broke against the ancient East, the thoughts go marching down the river, which was the most famous of all frontier lines. So we turned east, and on a warm and misty February morning, we passed under the cypresses of Abu Bekr and took the high road to Hierapolis. End of section 2.